Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Djinn. But what are Djinn? Well, according to some websites on the internet, a Djinn is a supernatural creature in Arabian mythology. They can either be good or evil, and as far as I understand it, are regarded sort of like cryptids and the evil ones, demons. But I suppose it's more fun to find out. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. The Malay people, like any other people around the world, have numerous folk beliefs and superstitions. In the Malay Peninsula today, West Malaysia, there is a superstition called Saka. Legend has it that Saka begins with someone striking a deal with a supernatural entity, a Djinn for example, to have the entity do something for them. This can range from helping their property safely, to getting them rich, or most commonly, to give them specific abilities, such as midwifery, or healing supernatural ailments. The deal involves the person promising that his descendants will take care of the entity when they are gone, and the entity promising to bestow the same aid to the descendant. Things become problematic when the descendant doesn't want to continue with the deal and rejects the legacy. The following is a story of one such situation that I encountered when I was very young. At the time, my family and I lived in a village just outside a town not far from Kuala Lumpur. Our compound bordered a much larger compound which belonged to a religious teacher whom the locals affectionately called Lek. I think it's a term of endearment and respect from an older man in Javanese, but my Javanese isn't that good. The compound was a large one. It comprises a large traditional style house, a small grove of fruit trees, and a small hut in the middle of the grove. There were always people coming and going at the house. Many of the local children go to the house to learn to recite the Quran from Lek. Lek's family was also rather large. Then there was a man who lived in the hut in the grove. Most people didn't give him a second look, but those who have interacted with him soon realized that there was something odd about the man. He was pleasant, friendly, and polite. He was also very ready to offer a hand when you needed help with something. The villagers noted that he seemed educated, intelligent, and even spoke English fluently. He, however, always had a look that can be best described as haunted. He also never ventured out of the compound after dark. Every night, he would promptly retire to the hut after Isyak prayers and dinner at Lek's house. Another thing that intrigued the locals was that this man would often get visitors coming to see him. These visitors came in luxurious cars but never stayed past sundown. The rest of the story I garnered from conversations of older people around me. Honestly, I never paid much attention to the man. I was in my early teens, and there were much more interesting things for me to do, but the conversations were there, and I apparently have a good memory. The man was indeed well educated and rich. He apparently had rich parents who provided him with the best of everything, from education to clothes and more. After graduating from an overseas university, he returned and started to work with his father to run the family company. He proved to be a talented businessman, and within a few years he had been instrumental to take the company to greater heights. The years went by, the man married, and soon began to raise a family of his own. His children also proved to be just as intelligent as he was, and were very good students. He sent them overseas to study, and they returned with their qualifications. His eldest son came to work with him at the company. His second son decided to start his own, which became successful, and his only daughter decided to become an academician. She too was successful and excelled in her field. The man's father grew old and frail. Not long before he passed, he called for the man to see him when he was in the hospital. The man's father told him a family secret. He said that their family had a legacy. The man's father told him that it is necessary for the eldest of the family to continue the pact that their ancestors had made with the Djinn. The Djinn promised to make the keeper rich, and in return, the legacy bearer would have to perform a ritual for the Djinn at a specific time every month. If not, the Djinn would do bad things to the legacy bearer. The father then said that it is time for him to pass the legacy on to the man. The man, however, was religious, and he recognized that in Islam it is forbidden to make a pact with a supernatural entity, especially jinns, so he refused. His father told him that if he did not receive the legacy willingly, the Djinn would not leave him in peace until he accepts the pact. Still, the man refused. Shortly after, the man passed away. They say he did not pass peacefully, but I do not remember more details than that. That's when the man's troubles began. At first, he started seeing glimpses of shadows darting around him wherever he went, especially at night. This didn't last too long, until he began to hear his name being called from random directions. He began to feel ill for unexplainable reasons. His doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him, but after nightfall he would regularly develop a slight fever. Then began the nightmares. In it, he would find himself in his ancestral home, where he would meet an old man dressed in black. The old man would hand him a book which was wrapped in a yellow cloth. The man knew what this meant, so he refused it every time, and then the man would morph into something black with long bony fingers and sharp nails. The creature would then strangle the man, at which point he would wake up covered in sweat. Occasionally, he would find scratches on his neck. They looked like they were made by claws or fingernails. The man tried to ignore all of this, but his wife and children began to experience it too. He knew he had to do something about it. At first, he tried performing the pertinent prayers to ward off the evil spirits. It worked for a while, but it always returned. The family then had disturbing experiences escalate. At that point, the man knew he needed to seek help. Then his wife grew ill, and she passed. The man was now determined more than ever to rid himself of the Djinn. He began to seek help from bomos, traditional shamans, but he soon discovered there were many charlatans among them. He also realized that some of them used practices that were not condoned by his religion and made more pacts with supernatural entities. He was also introduced to religious teachers that taught him more specific prayers which helped a little, but the experiences didn't go away. Finally, someone introduced him to Lek. He met with Lek at Lek's house one day after Lek's Quran class and his students had gone home. I don't know which rituals or prayers Lek had used, but he did ascertain that there was indeed a Djinn coming after him. They then tried to exorcise the Djinn, but it did not work. After a few more sessions, the disturbances against his family stopped, but the Djinn now seemed to concentrate his efforts on the man. The man said he would only be at peace when he was at Lek's place, so he asked Lek to teach him how he could defeat the Djinn, and sent it on its way. It was to be a long process, and there was much to learn. Moreover, the man could still not find peace at home, and then asked if he could stay at Lek's place, but he did not want to impose on the family's privacy. So they decided to do what they did in the old days. The man relinquished the control of his company to his son, who was already running it successfully in his constant absence. He then built, with Lek's permission, a hut in Lek's compound near the fruit trees. It was actually quite nice, while it was like a studio apartment but on the ground. The man moved in shortly after. For years the man stayed there and looked after Lek's fruit trees when he was not learning from Lek. The children would come to visit him often. He was there for years until Lek passed. He died in a hit and run. I don't know if the driver was caught. By that time the man had learnt the knowledge that he needed to, and the necessary skills, so he thanked Lek's family for their hospitality and left the hut as a thank you gift to them. They said the man returned to his home and not long after confronting the Djinn, successfully vanquished it. They said that the knowledge and skill that he had learned from Leg enabled him to help others with the same problem he had too. This story took place in a town in Iraq. It was told to me by my father. My family's neighbors were two brothers who lived with their sister, and one day they came to my father seeking help. Apparently their sister had disappeared and they couldn't find her. The father helped them look for her, and they searched everywhere, including police stations and hospitals, but they couldn't find her. Eventually they got really desperate and started visiting seers. None of them helped as expected. They'd take the money and give no valuable information. They felt hopeless until a man visited them offering his help. He asked for no money, but he said he needed a girl or boy who hadn't hit puberty for his ritual. So my father and the two brothers asked their one neighbor who happened to have a little girl for help. Everyone, including my father, two brothers and the seer and the little girl's parents, gathered in one room. The man started blindfolding the child, taking out 2 cards with words in an unknown language written on them, and reading them aloud. He asked the child to open her eyes and describe what she saw while blindfolded. The girl said she was in front of a forest and could see a castle with 2 tall beings standing guard. The man tells her to not be afraid and go inside, because the guards wouldn't say anything to her. She enters the castle and sees a man with red eyes sitting on a chair. The seer tells her to ask the man with the red eyes about the missing woman, but she says that he won't answer. He just turns his face away. The seer then puts his hand near the girl's head and crosses her fingers and says, "Tell me or I'll burn you." The girl starts perfectly describing the incident, how the woman was assaulted by a thief and then hospitalized afterwards. They found the woman in the same hospital the girl mentioned, and everything she said was confirmed to be true. And the seer? My father doesn't know what happened to him. I don't think they ever heard from him again. It is to be understood that jinns are beings that have different types of power. Some can fly, some shapeshift. They can see us, but we could not see them unless they show themselves to us. They're beings created from a smokeless fire, apparently. So anyway, I was in Pakistan and visiting family that live in a small village on the outskirts of the city. There's a woman living here who's a bit crazy. I mean, stare at her and she will throw stones at you crazy. I was minding my own business when I noticed her looking at me. This really freaked me out. The next day, it was really raining hard in the middle of summer. It was 1 a.m. and me and my cousin are on the roof and we hear something. We look below and see a woman, that woman, walking across the street, talking to herself loudly, holding a candle. The candle flame was blue and the rain could not extinguish the flame. We ran inside and all prayed. The next day we went to speak to the local imam or priest, and he said that he suspects that she is possessed, but she wasn't harming anyone and there was no proof supporting our claim. We told my uncle what happened. He got annoyed and physically dragged me to her home. It was so dark and creepy. He asked her about the night, and she said she had no idea what I was talking about, and that kids have the wildest imaginations. As we were leaving, she said to me, "Poor Jimmy." I didn't really understand it. We go back home to England, and then I find out my cat Jimmy died. On the same day, she said, "Poor Jimmy," to me. I moved to the UK with my brother about 4 years ago, who had moved in only 2 months before me, and we used to share a room in a shared house. Since the day I had moved in, I used to have very scary nightmares and would scream whilst asleep. One morning when I woke up, my brother asked me if I had experienced sleep paralysis that night, and I asked him, "How do you know?" He replied, because I did too. That was really shocking because there was something in the room playing tricks on both of us. This happened after a few months, and I and my brother happened to be on the same security shift on the same night in the middle of the fields, which could only be accessed through a dirt road since there was a solar farm being built and we had to take care of it. It was during the afternoon, and my brother fell asleep inside the cabin while I kept an eye outside, and what I saw was a white car that just sped on the dirt road, causing dust to fly everywhere, and I immediately came out of the cabin to see that there was nothing, so I brushed it off as my imagination. A little while later, when my brother woke up, he said that he had just had a dream about seeing a white car speeding on that road. That was another surprise. About a year later, my brother was doing nightly security with one of his friends on shift with him in the middle of nowhere, down south, and this is what he told me/my family. We were doing security shift in the middle of fields, far away from the city, and we were cooking ourselves some food on a camping gas stove out in the open. It was already dark, and there were no other human beings apart from us two, when suddenly we heard someone talking just a few yards away from us. My friend asked me if I had heard it, and I sure had, but for his sake I denied hearing anything, trying not to scare him, as there were no other human beings apart from us. The next event took place about a month or two ago, when I was on a security shift on a construction site, sitting inside a welfare cabin playing on my phone. It is my habit to close all the doors and windows due to the cold and having the heat on full. That particular site has direct power, not a generator. It had already been a few hours since the workers had left, and it was already dark. So there I am sitting in the cabin for more or less 2 hours, and someone's safety helmet/hard hat just flew off the wall hanger hook near the cabin door and fell about a meter away from the wall itself. I panicked, as it was a sudden surprise, and as I mentioned earlier that all doors and windows were closed and the power is direct, so no generator shaking, and it sat there for 2 hours before it flew off the wall hanger hook. This story was told to me by my mother. I was very young at the time and could barely walk. I was probably around 1, and my mother would take me out to the front yard in the middle of the night for me to do my business. It was one of those nights, and I and my mother were in the middle of the night when my mum saw an egg-shaped light flying towards us in the air. We lived in a village near mountains, and it gives me chills every time I remember this story. An egg or oval-shaped light flying towards us in extreme dead silence of the night. It came closer and closer until flashed into our faces like the flash of a photo camera, and just vanished. We have never been able to find any explanation. The following event took place in the same location, but I was around 12 to 13 at the time. We had a huge shed in front of our rooms, which was supported by pillars at the front, and was good for sleeping in rainy summer nights, as it's very hot where we lived at the time. This event took place during one of the winter nights, and was told by both my parents the next morning. So I and my siblings were sleeping with my parents in one of the rooms when my father got up in the middle of the night and heard someone coming from the shed just outside the room. The noise sounded like someone's sigh, as if someone in deep fever or in extreme pain. At first, my father thought someone had broken in our house, so turned on his torch, but it went off as soon as he turned it on and would not switch back on. Main electricity wasn't working as power was turned off in the whole village, and my father tried to look around, but there was no one. If that was a Djinn, it must have been a very scary one, due to the sound and the feeling of its presence. Hairs on my whole body stand till this day whenever I remember that moment. I don't know how my parents handled the situation that night. I hope no one ever faces what my parents faced then. Next to our house was our neighbor's house. Note that most of the houses in our village are built in the same style. Rooms and then sheds supported by pillars in front of the rooms, and then the yard. So our neighbor's house was similar to our house. No one lived there as they all lived in the city, but we kept the house keys just in case. My younger brother used to play cricket with his friends in there, all aged between 7 and 10. One day as they were playing cricket as usual, when the ball went inside the shed and stopped next to a room door, when one of the boys went to go get the ball, and as soon as he got close to the room, sees knocking in the room door from inside. No one lived in the house as mentioned before. I saw all the kids screaming and running out of the house. The house is haunted, by the way, and the kids never played there after this incident. This story was told by a colleague of mine from my previous workplace. He was a Hindu, and this is what he said. One of the relatives was an artisan jewelry maker. He used to make artificial jewelry products at his house during the night and would sell them in the morning. One day I received a call about the same relative saying he had not returned home for 2 days. So I, along with a few other people, went out to search for him. They found his body washed away near a riverbank. We prepared the funeral, and after the funeral I stayed the night with his family. At some point during the night, I woke up and heard the sound of a very small hammer used by the deceased to make jewelry, as if someone was still crafting. I'm a grown man, but was very scared. I pretended to be asleep and returned home the next day, and have never been there since. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago, when I used to work in a warehouse which was a bit old, as I had seen goods and documents from the 1960s to 80s there. The warehouse had a basement and a first floor, and the lighting was not very good. All floors could only be accessed through a cargo/elevator or lift, as the only narrow staircase was kept locked at all times. It was a very silent and creepy place. There was a DVD player with 2 speakers on top near the lift doors in the basement, which had been there a while, but they were there. One day I was waiting for the lift in the basement as my colleagues were sending some goods down, which then I would unload in the basement, when suddenly one of the speakers started shaking violently, almost dancing, and then fell on its side, and I felt there was something else besides me in the basement. Another event took place in a room in my house. Few of my family members complained about a disturbance in one particular room. One day we found sugar scattered all over the floor in that room. A few days later, as soon as I entered the room, I felt a strong wind that went past my left, as if someone had just ran past me so close I could sense the feeling of being on my skin. I turned around, but there was nothing in the room. The feeling of someone's presence from a while ago was gone. Whatever it was had left the room upon me walking in. Some other things also happened, like knocks on cupboards/wardrobes and noises of dishes being messed with from the kitchen, but it never scared or hurt any of us. This story was told to us by our very pious elders, who's nearly 100 years old. He lives in a village in the mountains in northern Pakistan. His house is located next to a graveyard, or in other words, his gate opens into the graveyard. This is what he said: that he used to chop medium-sized trees up in the mountain, load them on a donkey, and bring them down to the village to sell. So there he was in the middle of the mountain one day when he spotted a man walking just a bit far behind him. He had snow-white, cottonish beard, and was wearing white clothes, and his head was covered with a white piece of cloth like the Arabic turban. He'd never seen a man like that, and he wasn't a man. He was walking away, and then faded into thin air. His body was shaken by that incident, and fear overcame him. So then he prayed to see the man again, and a few years after the incident, he was deep in his sleep in the middle of the night, and had a dream that someone was banging very hard on his house gate. he suddenly woke up, and it turns out someone was banging on his gate. He hesitated to walk across the yard and open it, as it was the middle of the night or very early in the morning. What he saw was the same man walking away from the gate, in all white. He wanted to speak but couldn't. He eventually faded, and that was the last time he saw him. He doesn't know who or what that was. One of our neighbors, who was an old lady, used to live alone in her haunted house, and another neighbor's daughter, aged 20, used to sleep over with her in case the old lady might need help at night, as she was an old lady, and this is what the old lady told us one day. The other night she was waiting for the girl when she walked from the main gate. She greeted her, but she didn't reply and walked straight into the house, and then into the room where they slept. She thought she might have been tired from working all day, and that's why she didn't talk and went straight into the room to sleep. As she was thinking about the girl, she walks in again from the main gate. The lady got confused. She didn't know what to say, but this time she spoke. Who was the first girl that had walked in and went straight to the room? They both went together to check, but as you can imagine, there was no one. I'm a filmmaker. I love making short films, and a goal of mine is to be creating indie feature films and owning my own production company. I love the film industry, but for some reason I always tend to be drawn to horror. Perhaps it's my interest in the unknown. A few weeks ago I was getting out some food. I walked past a Salvation Army store, which, for those of you who don't know, they sell used items for very cheap that people donate to them. Besides the store was a small section where they toss out stuff they cannot sell. I decided to look inside and see if there's anything worth picking up. And there was a super creepy toy doll. Now most people would not want to take creepy dolls home with them, but not me. I thought it would make a great prop for a short horror, so I threw it in the trunk of my car. Fast forward 2 weeks, I've made my short film, but decided to keep it, as it might be worth something when I get famous. A few days pass, it's 3 in the morning, and I'm busy writing a script for a potential short film. My wife is in bed, and with the exception of my PC monitor, there's no other light on. In the middle of writing, I hear a doorknob turn, and a door open behind me. I look back to see my walk-in closet door all the way open. Now I'm 100% positive that it opened by itself because we never leave the door open. I get a strange feeling in my gut, but I quickly ignore it and get back to writing. I wasn't scared, but nothing like this has ever happened to me. As a kid, I used to turn off all the lights in my basement, grab a flashlight, and go ghost hunting. My sister and cousin, who I forced to come with me, thought I was crazy. The next day I was just cleaning around the house, and I brought my laundry to my room. When I tried to open the door to my walk-in closet, it was locked. I didn't even know that it could get locked. It stayed locked until the morning after, and that very night at 3 in the morning, I was playing some video games when I heard a click behind me. The bathroom light turned on by itself. I'm 100% sure that it was off before. The strange feeling I had 2 nights ago had returned. Just this morning as I was driving to work, I felt a hand grasp my shoulder and no one else was in the car. Now I'm not sure what is the cause of all this, and I don't want to speculate, but I will update if anything else happens. I don't want to know if this creepy doll is haunting us. I'm from a religious family, but from a young age have been skeptical and a critic of religion in general. This singular experience has been enough for me to wonder whether there really is a God, or perhaps more to this world than we think. I was maybe 11 years old at the time. It was midday and mainline electricity had just come back on, and my father had asked me to turn the generators off, which were located on the 3rd floor of the house. I walk up the stairs, thinking about the dinner my mother was making, and how I couldn't wait to have some chicken. I reached the 3rd floor, which is accessed through the 2nd floor balcony, turn the generator off, and start making my way down. As I'm walking down the stairs, I see it out of the corner of my eye, standing in front of the 2nd floor entrance into the house. I focus my gaze on it, in complete disbelief of what I'm seeing. I remember very vividly telling myself not to take my eyes off it, so I could gauge if it were real or not. It being a black cloaked figure/man, the length of the door, with only its head and its hands exposed, that were a red/pink hue, like the flesh had been burnt or melted. Its gaze was piercing. My legs turned to jelly. I lost balance, falling down the stairs, but managing to hold on to the railings. And when I looked back, it was gone. I raced downstairs in complete horror, asking my father if he had seen it, or if he was just pulling a prank on me. But he just looked at me like I was crazy, and said I was imagining things. I know for sure it wasn't some fragment of my imagination. When I told my aunt this story, she told me her son had also seen him, a man in the house, but thought that he was talking nonsense. I have no family history of schizophrenia. This has never happened to me before, and it hasn't happened since. I still get goosebumps thinking about it 14 years later. Has anyone seen something resembling this? My closest guess is that it could have been a djinn. This is what happened to my cousin and I at a fishing trip. Till this day, my cousin and I can still not explain what we have seen. My cousin's family is located in Lansdale, and one night his family and I decided to head to a dock to fish at night. They planned to catch catfish during the night, and my cousin and I opted to walk towards the path to the end of the dock. At this time of day, the dock was almost pitch black, with a few lights on the dock path. Well, by the time we reached the end of the dock, we saw a small bridge connected to the dock and leading into the woods across the water from the dock. We decided to walk on the bridge to the woods and see who gets scared and runs back to the dock. Halfway over the bridge, we see a trash can under a light post, and next to the trash can was this person-like figure. My cousin and I believe at first it was just clothes piled up to resemble a person. But we both walk up to it, and that's when the pile of clothes/person looks up through its hood of a hoodie, looking straight at us while the light is directly on top of it. When we looked into the hoodie while the light is shining right on it, we saw pure darkness, no face, even when the light was shining in the hoodie. We freaked out and ran. We came back with family members and friends to show them what we saw, and when we returned, there was nothing. Till this day we believe we saw a djinn, or something our brains couldn't possess. Everyone else believes it was just a homeless person, but my husband and I know what we saw, and it was pure darkness. My friend from Iraq told me a story some time ago about an experience his great-grandfather had with a genie in a ring. I'll go through the story and then the connections I see between the history of the story and my friend's family. The story. My friend was born in Baghdad, but I'm not sure of his family's origin. They are or were devout Christians, so the fact that his mother told me this story in total honesty is a testament to how serious they took the events. The great-grandfather, when he was a young boy, was playing in an abandoned house when he found a ring. Either there was something attached to the ring, or it was there in the building as well. But the way she described it was that it came with the ring. So whatever was attached to the ring was not malevolent. She says it took him all over the world at night and showed him different cities and sights. He accurately described places he had never been and couldn't have known or been to any of these places. This made his mother take the issue seriously. She contacted the local priest and begged him to perform an exorcism. The priest actually says she didn't recommend doing that because this wasn't the kind of spirit you could do that to. She begged anyway, and eventually the priest gave the exorcism and the spirit left forever. No word of what happened to the ring. She said the name of the spirit was Malak Saleh or something like that. Connections. The first connection is, of course, that from the original story the genie comes from a ring. Second is that on the manuscript, which was supposedly translated by a person who shares the last name with my friend's mother, and third is that the manuscript he translated was from Baghdad. Fourth is that the spirit did not grant any wishes or anything like that, but was able to more act independently. Fifth is that the ring was found in an abandoned building, which, according to popular theory, is where jinns tend to dwell. Sixth is that Galland, who wrote the first story to reach Europe, heard the story from a Catholic woman. And seventh is the church where the woman belonged to, and it's the same as my family's friends. In closing, I don't know what more to ask moving forward. I have these connections but no idea how to investigate further. Some of these connections are circumstantial and would only mean anything if the original story were true. And as much, I don't mind assuming the story is true for the purposes of investigating. I'm gonna feel really silly if it was complete fiction. What do you guys think? This happened in Iraq in 2018. It was a very stormy day, and you can say thunder and sandstorms cover the whole sky, making it an orange color. The wind was so strong, it made the doors open and close. It made windows slam roughly, and there was this howling sound like screams. I was alone in the family house, where all my grandfathers used to visit. I was playing some games trying to ignore the weather and that creepy sound. After an hour of playing, I heard someone knocking at the door. I looked through the window, which allowed me to see the street. It was strange, no one was there. I thought it was the wind sound, so I ignored it, but then the knocking happened again. I walked to the door to see who was there, but before I opened it and said who's there, I waited for just a moment, and there was someone who said, "I'm just an old man. Can you let me in your house? I can't stand such weather." I opened the door. His whole appearance was very strange, very odd. He had a long white beard, with very old clothes and a black and grey turban. He was putting some small cloth in his mouth as a mask to protect him from the sand. His right eye was white, and he was tall. The strangest thing was his right hand. It was so black, and was wearing some strange rings. He sat in a chair and I said, "Do you need anything, sir?" He looked at me with a smile and said that he'd like some tea and water. He said that since I was very kind, he'd offer me 2 gifts. One was to answer a question, and the other will be foresight into what will happen in the future. I looked at him in bewilderment. How could he know the future? He's just an old man. He told me he was a sage, a sorcerer, and that he's traveled to many parts of the world. He said he had taken many steps to become one, and he got struck by thunder on his hand, and that he had to put his hand on fire for a full day, and then on water for 3 days to gain control of elements. There were also these strange rings. He said each ring, his Djinn and Ifrits were inside, and they were his servants. He captured them in the desert, and he summoned them. He then went on to ask what I wanted to know of the future. I looked at him and saw his hand was on fire, and it didn't seem to hurt him at all. I was scared and frozen. He told me at first I would be moving to one country for 1 year, and then one of my family members would perish in a peaceful and painless death, and told me the Middle East would have problems, but it would be fixed in later years, and that Europe and America will have disasters, especially America. It would have ice, fire, and earthquakes. After telling me all of this, he began walking to the door and started to leave. He told me he would be back next year on the same day and thanked me for everything. I was left there shocked and so stunned. Everything he said came true. My grandmother died in the hospital. She had a coma and her brain stopped. The doctors said it was without any pain. And not to mention that there were problems with the Middle East. Hopefully, it will be sorted. And America has suffered from very low temperatures, making it almost freeze. And the weather there was awful. Not to mention the forest fires that have happened quite recently as well. Is it all a coincidence? Or is what he said true? I'm now waiting to see when he will return. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's Djinn stories. First time we've actually ever done them. So it's a pretty big deal for the channel, and you guys voted for them. So, pat on the backs to all of you. If you'd like more Djinn stories, please be sure to let me know. I think they're a very interesting cryptid, a lot of marvelous and interesting stories to say the least. If you want more, you have to let me know. And if you do, I'll pop it in the polls from time to time to see if we're going to have it again. In any case, a huge thank you to my amazing patrons whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing, and if you'd like your name on screen, feel free to check out the link to Patreon, where you can donate as little as $1 a month to have your name on screen and a little bit more for some awesome rewards. All the info is on the website. If there's a story of something that's happened to you that you would like read on the channel, you can send it to my email or post it to my Reddit page. Either are fine. Just be cautious with your grammar, punctuation, and paragraphing to ensure that I use it, as I only use the best written stories. In any case, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.